Welcome, everyone, to the 33rd meeting of the Standing Committee on Official Languages. Yes, Mr. Villeneuve, I can see your hand. I just wanted to be faster than my colleague, Mr. Godin, for once.
Je suis vraiment désolé.
I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry, Joël. Okay, I remember when we had our first meeting, Mr. Chair, we started, it was a little bit chaotic. And, everybody was new. We were just started. And I just wanted to say that since the beginning of our work, we've succeeded in having a great harmony in this committee. Point of order, Chair.
No.
He just cut all my inspirations, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry. What I was saying is that, okay, yeah, sometimes we have a few difficulties here and there. That's normal. But we said that we would all be working for our citizens. So we know that the majority has changed side now. And what I wanted to say is that we are certainly hoping to continue working with the same harmony. That's all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Villeneuve and Mr. Donnet. So does this mean you're going to vote with us? You said harmony, right?
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Villeneuve, and thank you to everyone for the goodwill. I think we can certainly work together on those objectives, and I appreciate your comment, Mr. Villeneuve. Colleagues, before we start with our witnesses, I just wanted to inform you that we had scheduled a witness for the second hour of our meeting today, and this witness asked that we change that they come but another day. So the question for you will be, we have our witnesses for 1 hour, and we appreciate your flexibility because I know that there's been a delay already. But the question is, how do we want to spend the last half hour of our scheduled meeting? We can certainly finish after we're done with our witness, or we can continue with a report or something else. So I just want to hear people on this topic. Mr. Villeneuve? Yes, in fact, what we were suggesting, Mr. Chair, is that we finished the first half hour, but that we still have a full hour with our witnesses, and then we just adjourn. Any other comments? So 1 hour with our witnesses, and then we finish at that time? Yes, okay, that's perfect. So we decided. So in accordance with Rule 108.3 of the Rule of Procedures and the motion adopted on April 21st, 2026, we are meeting today to consider the preliminary draft regulation of the use of French in private enterprise under federal jurisdiction. And I would like to welcome again to our witnesses of the Department of Canadian Heritage, Julie Boyer, Assistant Deputy Ministers, Official Languages, Heritage and Regions, Sarah Boily, Director General, Official Languages, and Richard Léger, Director, Official Language Regulation. So you will have 5 minutes for your speech, and then we will move on to questions from the MPs. So you have the floor for 5 minutes. Good morning. Thank you very much. I would like to point out that we are gathered on the traditional Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. I am pleased to be with you today. As the chair said, my name is Julie Boyer, and I am the Assistant Deputy Minister for Official Languages, Heritage and Regions at the Department of Canadian Heritage. I am here with Sarah Boily and Richard Léger. I would first like to thank you, the committee, for its report on the draft regulation concerning administrative monetary penalties in relation to official languages, as well as for its interest in reviewing the regulatory framework. The 4 recommendations aimed at broadening the scope of the draft regulation will be carefully examined and taken into consideration in accordance with the legislative framework established by the Official Languages Act. Mr. Chair, the publication of the draft regulation on administrative monetary penalties in the Canada Gazette, as well as the tabling in Parliament of the draft regulations on the use of French in private enterprise under federal jurisdiction, marks an important milestone in the implementation of the modernized Official Languages Act. These developments build on a historic commitment made in 2021 when the federal government pledged to protect French in the private sector under its jurisdiction. Recognizing that French is in a minority position in Canada and North America due to the predominant use of English, the government has taken concrete action. Thus, in June 2023, the Act to Achieve Substantive Equality Between Canada's Two Official Languages received royal assent. It enacted a new law, the Act on the Use of French in Private Enterprises under federal jurisdiction. It will come into force at the same time as its regulations, first in Quebec and 2 years later in regions with a strong Francophone presence.
And Francophone.
Alors,
it creates new rights regarding the language of service and communication, as well as the language of work. The Act provides a framework for the use of French to structure relations between businesses, their employees, and their consumers. In the designated regions, businesses maintain working and commercial relationships with Francophone clients and employees. Our cost-benefit analysis demonstrates that despite initial costs, the proposed framework is generating net positive benefits, notably through better quality of services, reduced internal friction, greater stability of business relations. Comme l'a souligné le ministre Miller lors de sa comparution devant le comité sénatorial permanent.
As Minister Miller emphasized during his appearance before the Standing Senate Committees on Official Languages on April 27, the measures we are proposing will not harm English, but will strengthen French. Canadians who use French must benefit from adequate protection. At the end of 30-day sitting period in the House of Commons, the draft regulations will be published in the Canada Gazette Part 1, the Government of Canada's official consultation mechanism for regulatory matters. The draft regulation are the results of rigorous work carried out over several years, including extensive consultation with businesses, trade unions, and the public, in order to provide a concrete response to the needs of French-speaking Canadians. It is an essential tool for giving full effect to the language reform and reaffirms the government's commitment to achieving substantive equality between French and English. I thank you for your attention, and we are now ready to answer your questions. Thank you, Ms. Boyer. And now we're going to move on to the questions from our MPs. So, Mr. Godin, 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, Ms. Boyer and your colleagues, we are all very happy to see you. And we have a lot of hope because of the fact that you're so receptive in improving the regulation. Ms. Boyer, in your message, what you said was about the monetary administrative sanction. And you say that you're going to look at our recommendation. I have heard commitments on your part, and I sure hope it's going to go that way. But you forgot to talk about Part 7. Part 7 is another regulation that is in the process and that we are studying right now in this committee. And I think at that point, there is a lot of work to do on that particular section of the regulations. When it comes to the objectives of the use of the Act on the Use of French. When it comes to the modernization of the Official Languages Act, Part 1 and Part 2, which is the IFEP, my understanding was that in Quebec, where the common language is French, we were going to mandate employees of businesses that are under federal jurisdiction, they would have to speak French. But the regulation doesn't say that. It says that that act allows the employees to communicate. They may work in French, and the current employee. So it's not exactly the same. This is not exactly the meaning of the act when we studied it. So maybe can you give us a little bit more justification in this regard, please? Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. Of course, when you are developing a legal framework, it comes, a regulation framework, it comes straight from the intent of the act. And this is confirmed because this is a process of writing with experts in Justice Canada. They know how to write based on the authorities given by the act. The objective of the act is really to ensure that the employees may work in French in Quebec, in the businesses that have at least 25 employees. So they can work in French as they already do if they are under the French language charter. Thank you, Ms. Boyer. In fact, this was not exactly the content of the discussion, but you have to remember the famous Thursday where we lost all the necessary tool to force employees under federal jurisdiction to speak French. It happened between Thursday night and Friday morning, because you have to remember that the amendments were defeated because the government of Quebec had an agreement with the Canada government. And I think that Francophonie was actually on the losing side of this. So let's come back more specifically. You're talking about regions with a high Francophone presence, and you're saying the threshold is 100 employees. So why this number? How did you establish the number of 100 employees? Thank you very much for the question. For a regulatory framework to be solid, it must be possible to execute it, to put it in application. So in regions where there is a strong Francophone presence, we have estimated that there has to be at least 100 employees in all of Canada to demand that in a region where there are a lot of Francophones, the scheme could be applied. Thank you for the answer. Don't you think that in a situation where you have minority language communities, that number is going to be more restricted? Wouldn't it be easier, if you really intend to protect French, to simply stop the decline of French, to allow businesses with a number of employees that is lower to simply have this tool to mandate their employees to speak French and to work in French? The scheme, okay, I'm going to talk about the 100 employee section. There has to be 100 employee in that company in all of Canada for the obligation to exist. So what is the 500? It is for a French language promotion committee if the company has 500 employees. But at 100 employee, let's just remember, so those businesses under federal jurisdiction, it's telecommunication, banks, transport companies. So if the company, for example, TD Bank in Winnipeg has more than 100 employees in Canada, Winnipeg is a region where there is a strong French-speaking presence. So even if that particular bank in Manitoba, there isn't 100 people, well, that person can work in French and services can be provided in French. You have 40 seconds. But they are not mandated to work in French in this kind of region, are they? No, the obligation is not on the employee, but on the employer. And the employer must supply all the tools for this employee to be able to work in French. And 100 employee was determined how? 20 seconds. By the number of employee. Why is it 100? Why is it not 50? Why is it not 200? Here, Mr. Chair, the factor that were taken into account for the operationalization of the scheme, we simply looked at the size of the business to find out if it would be able to find the tools, the training, the policies in order to be able to guarantee either the services or the language, the workplace language in French. Thank you, Mr. Godin. The clerk is asking me if we could suspend for 1 minute for technical reason, and we come back in 1 minute. We are suspending for 1 minute.
Collègues, donc, on pense, nos techniciens.
Colleagues, the technical people are working on the issue, and I'll just speak for a few minutes to test the system.
On commence avec la prochaine série de questions. Ça va? Ça marche?
And then we'll start with the next series of questions as soon as we test the system. Oh, is it corrected? Great, wonderful. So we're going to proceed with the next member, Mr. Beaulieu, 6 minutes. In order to answer my colleague about the Anglophone group's questions, right now, Anglophone is progressing and French is regressing. So that's easy to see this in the workplace. English is by far more predominant. So it's French that needs support. And normally we would have the support of all of the opposition in order to apply Bill 111 in federally regulated businesses. And then this is how the UFPBA was in order to stop applying Bill 101 to federally regulated businesses. So these two are in competition sort of right now. So I know it's not your role to get into politics here, but right now, the federally regulated businesses who are under Bill 101 in Quebec, they had no choice, of course, because 101 applies to all businesses that are on Quebec territory, apart from the UFPBA exception. And so for those who've already started the Francisization process, withdrew from the CFL and went with the Official Languages Act. And in the memoir, it says about 40% of the businesses, it's a rough estimate, of federal regulated businesses are not yet registered to the French language charter, and those businesses will automatically be registered to the UFPBA. Is that correct? Yes, what I might add, Mr. Chairman, is that the regulation, once the regulation is adopted and in force, and at that time, all federal regulated businesses will have to obey the law. They can choose how to abide by the charter, but they have to go with one, and it must be the law must be obeyed. No, so you said that you would publish the register of all federal regulated businesses who are not yet registered. Well, I think that the way the text is written, the minister will be publishing the list of all the federal regulated businesses who will have to abide by the framework. They will be identified and that information will be made public. So this is for federal framework. Yes. And also those who abide by the French language charter. And the federal government will be able to publish it. So you've said that there's some negotiations with the government of Quebec in order to share. Well, we'd hope so. And actually in the Act, it says that we might be able to conclude an agreement with the government of Quebec in order to agree on how to share the lists. And this would be in the next stages. So that 25 employees. So that is because the French language charter also applies to any business above 25 employees. So there are committees for Francization, and in the case of the UFPBA, it's promotion of French. So businesses or federally regulated businesses that are 25 employees or more, will they have to abide by this? So if they choose the federal act, then the threshold is 100 employees in order to be able to have a committee for the promotion of French. So because there is an important issue for the federally regulated. So will it be the commissioner for official languages are going to be in charge of acting and supervising, monitoring the application of the law? Well, in fact, it will come from the minister who is responsible for heritage and official languages. So once the act is enacted, the businesses will have 6 months in order to be able to obtain their generalization of the French language use and linguistic certification, and have to give a list about how many employees they have, how many employees speak French, know French, and etc. So they will have 6 months to register, and then another 6 months to make a report. Yes, it'll give them a report to 6 months to act, yes, and then 6 months to give the necessary documentation for the committee for the promotion of the French language. Okay, so very quickly. Right now, within the proposed regulations, we don't know exactly how it will be framed. There are not too many details about this. Will there be any monetary sanctions? I draw your attention to the provisions in the law. I think I had it here. It is section 10.1.1 on the generalization of the use of French, which gives you a whole series of measures that the minister who is responsible for official languages will study and make sure that everything is fulfilled in terms of the Committee for the Use of French Language. And then you referred to the Commissioner for Official Languages. Yes, of course. So any complaint made can be made either at the QLF or the Commissioner for Official Languages federally to make recommendations and investigations. And after that, everything will apply, except when it comes to administrative sanctions, which would be monetary sanctions. I must.
Le temps est bien coulé. Je passe maintenant à M. Bélanger pour...
Now I give the floor to Mr. Bélanger for 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I have a question about the Francophone presence, a strong Francophone presence. How do you determine that? Is it a specific number? Because in our region, in the north of Ontario, there are many parts of that region that are Francophone, small Francophone communities where that law does not apply, but it would be important to have it implemented. Well, thank you, Chair. There are 3 criteria that have to be met before you're strong, an area with strong Francophone presence. First of all, 20% of the population should be able to request services in French. That's the first criterion. That allows us to seek New Brunswick that has 34% potential of requests in services in French. The second element is the census divisions, which have 25% potential requests, and that is the second category. So in that second criteria, you can find some pockets in Ontario and Nova Scotia, I believe. And the third criterion is large cities, where there is a minimum of 30,000 people, and which have a section of people who are about 10% of people requesting services in French. That's the third criterion. We will find cities, neighborhoods in the city of Winnipeg and some neighborhoods in Alberta in the city of Bonidum with that third criterion. It should be one of the 3 criteria, not all of the 3. Question. Yeah, and I'm thinking about smaller Francophone regions. I'm thinking about the national corporations. I'm thinking also about small and medium-sized enterprises that don't have 100 employees. There are many of them that do not have 100 employees. So how does this law affect those employees? I'm thinking about some companies in the north of Ontario, which are not national corporations. They do not have 100 employees. How do you determine that these require 100 employees? Yes, it's what I'm talking about. They need to be 100 employees in areas of strong Francophone presence. So a small neighborhood in a small city that don't meet that criterion, if they are 100 other employees in other parts of Canada that meet those criteria, then they could have the option of working in French, but we need to go and look for the 100. Yeah, well, I've heard about objectives and measures. So how do we make sure that companies with respect to the regulation? Well, we will have to count on our efforts on promoting this law because the Department of Official Languages is in charge of ensuring these regulations are promoted and determined. And so we hope that Canadians will exercise their rights, and maybe over time we might need to adjust a few things. Thank you. I cede my time.
En fait,
1 minute. 1 minute 25. Ms. Boillier, you said that the minister must publish the list of corporations or companies that will be under federal law or under the OQLF. Well, my answer concerned the list of companies that will respect the federal regime. And where is it written in the law? Because I haven't seen it.
habilité.
The minister is authorized to do it. Is it shall or may? I saw the topic publication. The minister may publish on site. So there's no requirement here. So maybe we're not talking about the same thing. Well, the intention is to do it, and the ministry has the authorization to do it. It is linked to the law on the use of French incorporation at sections 12 and 13 of this law. The department is required to inform the public of its rights.
Donc, la loi fait en elle-même.
The law makes the distinction between the roles of the minister and the roles of the commissioner. And where is it written that the minister shall publish? Thank you for the question. I was talking about the ministerial authorization.
Je dois vous...
Mr. Godin, I must interrupt you here. Time is up.
Monsieur
I apologize. Now I give the floor to Mr. Autremont for 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I want to repeat similar questions that Mr. Bélanger just asked. The same thing happens in Nova Scotia, small Francophone communities that do not necessarily have a strong Francophone presence. Even regions that I represent in the Southwest are small and medium-sized enterprises. Technically, they may have representations of federal institutions, but at the same time, although Halifax is not in that category either. So can you explain to us how you decided on these criteria and which communities in Nova Scotia have strong Francophone presence?
Oui, mais les critères, comme l'a mentionné, je pense, Madame Boilly.
Well, as Ms. Boilly mentioned earlier, there are 3 types of criteria, and I would speak of the second criterion concerning the census count. There is a map that represents regions that have been defined through that statistical methodology. It is available on Heritage Canada's website since the publication of this law. It shows those parts of Nova Scotia that are covered by this law. Areas like Richmond that have potential demand in the census division. It goes beyond 25%. Question. Is Halifax not in that category because it seems that the largest growing Francophone community is in Halifax? Schools are being built in Halifax, Edmond, Dartford. So there is marine presence, there's federal presence in Halifax. So I would really like for us to see it as an area with strong Francophone presence. Thank you for the floor, Chair. Well, according to our analyses, Halifax has an absolute number of Francophiles and Franco-French-speaking people. So on the whole, they will not meet the first part of the third criterion. So there's no 30,000, there aren't 30,000 people in absolute numbers available in the Halifax area. We're close to that, but not quite. And so we do not see Halifax meeting the other criteria, and they do not reach the census numbers of 20%. So it's really a matter of demographic density. We know that the new Francophone area and the growing Francophone area in Nova Scotia is Halifax. And the problem that we're going to have is that the Francophone community is about 10 or under 10%. And recently it was about 16%. And when we brought the law on Francophone services, it was 6%. And when we worked with people in regions that we talked about, like Argyll and Richmond, among others, these are the main historic regions where people were seeking services in French. My question now is, how will you regulate or make sure that services are accessible? I'm not speaking here about a regional problem. I'm asking about the access levels and how will these people be able to implement the law in those areas. Compliance to the regulation is under the supervision of the Official Languages Commissioner, and they are the ones who are authorized through a series of powers, and they are the ones who would influence ordinances and be able to make surveys and receive complaints from the public, regardless of the reports that the companies would have made with respect to introducing French in their companies. And all of this information will ensure that the regime is properly implemented. The powers of the commissioner will be able to distinguish, and they have jurisdiction over that. 15 minutes.
To complain when they don't get a service, they just switch to English and do it that way. So how do we make sure that doesn't happen?
En matière de service, je peux préciser.
Une réponse très rapide, s'il vous plaît.
Quick answer.
Okay.
Commissioner, the law itself is specific on this, but it's not the case for labor rights.
Okay. Merci, M. d'Entremont. Merci. Je passe la parole maintenant.
Thank you, Mr. d'Entremont. I now give the floor to Mr. Beaulieu for 2.5 minutes. Well, there's a media that wrote that the LOFEP was a copy and paste for Law 101, but it's not the case. And in case of infringement, the minister may refuse to issue a Francisation certificate. So I'm surprised here that the minister will be the one implementing the law. There could be a conflict of interest. It should be a committee or a board of official languages that should have that authority. But here we speak of the minister implementing that law. Well, that is how the law was drafted, but you know that behind the minister, there's a whole department that is going to monitor everything, and it's the team that is going to do the job. I also see that if a company in Quebec doesn't have this certificate, because it was very difficult to implement the French languages charter, because the larger companies didn't care about it at all. We know that there are consequences, a series of consequences available, amongst which, if they do not have that certificate, they do not have the right to have subsidies or guarantees with the government. That was quite efficient, but we do not see it. It's in this federal law. We don't see such consequences. There are other consequences, but yes, that specific one doesn't exist. That's it, because consequences and the ordinance, we have known about those for about 50 years, and it didn't produce any results. And so the commissioner will be able to issue financial sanctions, and we see things moving from what I understand, is that this law would be a toothless law. There would be no real consequences. Thank you, Chair, but I would like to add that ordinances are new powers of the Commissioner, so there isn't 50 years of failure in this law. Secondly, this is a regime that is equivalent to the regime of the French language charter, with a few exceptions. But when you talk about giving a contract, that is a condition that we do not have. But the Commissioner may issue a document of compliance, and if that compliance is not respected, they might request enforcement at the federal level. Time is up. Now I'll give the floor to Mr. Dalton for 5 minutes. Thank you for your presence. It's always a pleasure to see you. And following questions from my colleagues, like my colleague, the MP from British Columbia, are there areas where there is a strong Francophone presence where these rules will be applicable? I'm speaking of areas in British Columbia. Currently speaking, there is no high Francophone concentration area in British Columbia, so there won't be any company under this law. You said that there's 2 regions in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, I believe, and somewhere around Bonnyville. So how will this work? In Edmonton, in Bonnyville, for example, how will you circumscribe where these rules are applicable? Well, with the 2 years implementation phase, there's going to be a lot of awareness raising exercises so that companies under federal jurisdiction in those areas around the Saint-Jean campus be fully aware of the new requirements so that they can allow employees work in French, provide documents in French, and serve customers in French. I think they will be informed. I'm sure that the campus will be very happy about that, and the region as well.
Upfront costs, so significant. Can you elaborate on what significant is? What are the regulations? What are some? Have you projected what are some of the costs for the different size companies?
Yes, we had a very robust methodology to evaluate the costs over a period of 10 years, which we submit to the Treasury Board and will be made public once it's published when we table Gazette Part 1.
My question wasn't so much what the government cost is, it's more the cost for the businesses.
Sorry. Okay. We estimated the cost for businesses, and that is part of the impact assessment that we have to produce for Treasury Board Secretariat, so that they can take an enlightened decision before giving us a green light to table, for example, in the House of Commons, a regulation. And I can say that, the main costs are for training or translation of documents. And we also considered the eventual introduction of AI and other tools to translate in our methodology to cost out what it would cost a business, a small, medium enterprise to do these things.
So if you could submit that, have that submitted to the committee, that would be interesting.
It will become public when we publish Gazette Part 1.
Okay, great. And then, so for companies that have got 25 employees in Quebec and, say, 1,000 outside, then these laws apply to the entire company. Is that correct?
If they're based in Quebec, it applies to the...
No, not if they're based, but if they have, like, even a unit in Quebec of 25 employees, it applies to their entire operations across the country?
It applies to their entire operations in Quebec and in regions of strong Francophone presence. So their office in Toronto, which is not in such a region, would not carry obligations.
Okay, so I guess my question is will this impact or make some companies maybe a little more hesitant? Do you foresee that to expand in Quebec if it's just a small office because it would apply everywhere else? Do you see that as an issue?
45 seconds.
Yep.
Oui, comme c'est un nouveau régime, on verra avec le temps si
Well, since it's a new regime, we will see with time if companies move out. But it was already enforced in Quebec, so
Compagnie.
something else. If a company is in a region that is designated as a high Francophone presence, it would be applicable if there's 100 employees. So do you think that?
Comme une présence contre pour embaucher quelqu'un en France.
Would that dissuade those companies to hire people in French to cover those responsibilities? Well, very quickly, the impact assessment summary will be able to highlight the benefits that will be for the companies. When you will see that, you will understand. The floor to Mr. El-Khoury for 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Welcome to our excellent witnesses. Ms. Boilé, you mentioned that in areas where there is a high presence of Francophones, for example, in a bank, the company will be required to give services in French.
D'engager tous des personnels bilingues.
In such cases, is the bank forced to hire bilingual people or just a few people who speak French? And how can you control that? How can you verify that? Thank you very much for this question, Mr. Chair. No, it doesn't mean that all the employees in the businesses, for example, in St. Boniface, where there is a strong Francophone present, so the branch in St. Boniface doesn't have to have all Francophone employees. They must have bilingual employees because they must be able to offer French services, French language services at any time. So maybe they can have 2 people who can work in French that can offer the service in French, but they have to make sure that one of these people is available at all times during business hours. The government eliminated the barriers to interprovincial trade, but the common language in Quebec is French. So it's the only province where French is the official language, but French is spoken throughout the country. So will the act territorialize French, or will it include Quebec more into a pan-Canadian dynamics? As a civil servant, I am going to avoid giving any kind of opinion. That being said, what I can see is that the regulatory scheme, in fact, adds rights for the Francophone Canadian community, which did not exist before this regulation was drafted. So in my opinion, it is a good thing, and it will allow Francophones from Quebec. Sometimes they leave Quebec, they go travel in Canada, and they go in other regions where there is a strong Francophone presence. Well, they could be served in French in businesses. They could even find a job outside of Quebec, in St. Boniface or in Edmonton. They can work in French with French documents. So I would say it's a net benefit for the Canadian Francophone community. When this regulation comes into force, the federal government has jurisdiction in Quebec, but Quebec already manages businesses that are under federal jurisdiction, but that are French language. So one concern that we hear from Quebec is that the 2 schemes are not actually aligned. So can you explain to us the principal differences between this new act and the Charter of French Language in Quebec, as well as the main similarities? I can certainly do that, and thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I will start, and then I will turn to Sarah. I can tell you that there were some very long discussions and consultation and very tight collaboration with the government of Quebec. They looked at the Charter of French Language, they looked at the regulation that is proposed, and they looked literally the commas that weren't aligned and all the details that weren't aligned. And we did as best we can to try to eliminate any kind of differences. So there might be a few difficulties, but I can tell you that those two schemes are very equivalent with just a few tools that are different when it comes to implementation. Briefly, I can give you two examples. One example that we heard, for example, the Committee for the Promotion of French in Quebec. So in Quebec, we can have a committee for the Francization for businesses from 1 to 99 employees, whereas for the federal regulation, it's 100. And then the other difference is the composition of this committee. So in Quebec, the OQLF can sit on those committees. So that's another little difference. There's also a difference in the attribution of contract when the businesses do not quickly correspond to the criteria. Okay, you have 10 seconds left.
Vous êtes d'accord?
You agree that there is a decline of the French language in Quebec. I want to know from you, what are the measures that the government has taken to control that? And can you give us examples? And we don't have time for the answer, I'm sorry, but it was a very good question. It's a good question, but next time. So, dear colleagues, we have approximately 14 minutes with our witnesses. So we can go to the third round, but I'm going to shorten the times. So conservatives and liberal MPs will have 3 minutes, and Mr. Beaulieu, you'll have 1.5 minutes. Mr. Godin?
Pour les conservateurs, 2 fois.
So twice 3 minutes for conservative, and same for liberals. Yes. So, Mr. Gill, you have 3 minutes.
This committee. So my question is, federally regulated businesses in Quebec may be able to fall under either the federal regime or Quebec's Charter of French Language. Do you think that choice creates a risk of confusion about which rules apply?
Well, I'm happy to answer. Thank you for the question, Mr. President. I would say if you have two regimes asking for the same thing, it's hard to get away from it.
Okay. So Bill C-13 created new rights for consumers and workers to use French in federally regulated private businesses. But the act is still not in force almost 3 years later. Why has the government taken so long to bring them into effect? And when will French-speaking consumers and workers actually be able to rely on them?
Thank you very much for the question. So it did take some time, but I will say that both the teams at Treasury Board Secretariat and at Canadian Heritage took this responsibility very seriously. We had extensive pre-consultations, including with Indigenous groups, because this is a group that's excluded from this regulatory regime. So we wanted to make sure we would get it right. And so I would say that with the pre-consultations and preparing a robust analysis of impacts for the cost of these regulations to be as accurate as possible required us to meet with several unions, federally regulated private businesses as well of different sizes to be able to assess. And this is the result of this work.
Okay. There's 1 minute left.
So when it would come into effect, well, we'll see. But there's a next step would be to Gazette Part 1 and then Gazette Part 2, and it would come into effect in Quebec, where technically federally regulated private businesses should already be subject to the Charter of the French language. And if not, then they would have to become compliant to the federal regime. And 2 years later, Francophones outside of Quebec in the strong concentration or regions with strong presence of Francophones would receive the same benefits.
25 seconds, Mr. Gill.
French language rights need to be backed by clear and meaningful consequences. What consequences will businesses face under these regulations if they fail to provide service in French or respect French language rights?
So there's 10 seconds left, so a brief answer.
Well, the citizens that won't be able to get their services in French will be able to direct a complaint in front of the Commissioner of Official Languages, who will investigate, issue recommendations. The Commissioner can also try, as my colleague said earlier, try to get into a compliance agreement with the entity that's non-compliant. And if that fails, the Commissioner can bring out a stronger power that we have yet to test, as it's brand new, but it's the pouvoir d'ordonnance, the
Ms. Boilly,
order
I have to cut you off.
issue.
I'm sorry. We're well over time. I try not to interrupt the final answer if a question's asked before the time elapses. That's the principle I apply, but sometimes we can't, unfortunately, hear it all. OK, je passe la parole à M. Villeneuve pour 3 minutes.
Now, Mr. Villeneuve, for 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for all of you to be here this afternoon. I am an MP from Quebec, and I want to know how is this regulation an advancement for the promotion and advancement of French in Quebec? Can you tell me where we're moving forward with this? I think this is a concrete measure to protect French in Quebec. We recognized it in the Act. The federal said we will act. So we are acting where we have jurisdiction, which is private businesses of federal jurisdiction. If the businesses are already under the Charter of French Language, well, it's sort of the same thing. But this is a gesture that we will have done following the modernization of the Official Languages Act, and it is a net gain for Canadians of French language who didn't have that right before. So this project is establishing a new regulatory scheme, and the Commissioner will now have a role to play with those businesses. So if a complaint is deemed too complex for the Commissioner, can this complaint be transferred to the Canadian Council of the Industry Relations, and what are the conditions? I'm very happy to answer to this question. So for a regulatory scheme to work, there has to be some kind of recourse if there is a lack of respect for it. So we work with the Official Languages Commissioner. I mean, the Commissioner has a lot of experience, obviously. She's already responsible for the service language respected. So for the working language, we have an organization. We have the Council for Industrial Relationship of Canada, and what they do is make sure that the labor code is respected for businesses. And we're saying, okay, we're adding an obligation for employers, businesses. It's the first time we play in the private field and we add linguistic obligation. So it becomes pretty complex with the labor code. So we said the Commissioner can take on that complaint when it comes to the workplace language and can probably, find a solution. But if it's complex, then we want them to be able to go back to the Industrial Labor Relationship Board. So it's maybe like another kind of agreement in case the case becomes too complex. But we expect it to be in really exceptional circumstances. Thank you, and I believe I don't have any more time. Wait, thank you very much. You're correct. So now, Mr. Beaulieu, you have 1.5 minutes. Well, you already started to answer my questions, actually. That was started by Mr. Villeneuve, and we were talking about recourse, because if you don't have, coercion powers, basically, for an act, well, the person who doesn't want to respect the law won't need to. There are no consequences, no monetary sanctions. But if they are sending this to the Canada Industrial Relations Board, then there can be fines or consequences of some sort. Is this what I understood correctly? Thank you very much for the question. And I would tell you that for any regulatory scheme, there should be some kind of motivational, but also some way of correcting bad behavior. So for us, yeah, definitely, we do have a way to motivate people. Of course, you want to motivate people to talk more French in regions with a strong Francophone presence, because, lots of clients and citizens that have the right to this. So lots of motivation. And then we are, preparing the terrain when it comes to coercion powers. Well, the commissioner has new powers with the Modernized Official Languages Act. So this is pretty serious. We're talking about, putting the guardrails. I mean, if there's still a lack of respect for the law, then the courts can intervene to force a person to do that. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. So, Mr. Godin, 3 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. You said, Ms. Boyer, that whether we are under the federal legislation or the OLFQ is pretty much the same thing. So why equivalent and why not equal? You did use the word equivalent. So why not leave in Quebec the OLFQ? Why is the federal government coming into something that already exists in Quebec? Thank you for the question. But because Parliament adopted an act that mandated us to do this, which is why the use of French in Federally Regulated Private Business Act has come to this, and this will allow the promotion of French not only in Quebec, but also in region with a strong Francophone presence. There wasn't a possibility to give the responsibility the way Quebec said it should be. The act is just as specific as possible about the mandate of the commissioner. Okay, so this is the same thing as, Thursday night to Friday morning. Okay, you say here there's going to be a reassessment every 10 years. Do you recognize that French is in decline in Canada and in Quebec? Yes. Yes, this is what motivated the modernization of the Official Languages Act. I mean, why are you scheduling a review only in 10 years? I mean, we're already in decline. Why not 5 years? We will have data, census data in 5 years, so we will be able to, monitor the situation. We standardize the review with what's happening with the Treasury Board Secretariat, with the regulation on service to the public. So we might see some large demographic changes, but in Canada, it usually takes a while. This is why the 10 years was chosen, but there will be a halfway mark review. Don't you think that we should be able to act faster, because this will allow us to correct our trajectory so that maybe instead of being in decline for the next 10 years, we might be able to change the curve at 5 years. And this was in the act. I know that you're doing things as they come, but when it is actually written in the act. It's like the difference between counting and estimating. I mean, we should get the tools so that we can be more efficient. We are here around the table. We know that French is in decline. So why not have this review at 5 years? I am sorry, you have 5 seconds, so you have 1 sentence to respond.
D'accord.
Okay, so next time for the next round. So now Ms. Mingarelli for 3 minutes. Thank you. This government is trying to eliminate the obstacle to interprovincial trade. Quebec is the only province with French as an official language, but there's French throughout the country. With this act, territorialize Quebec, or will include it more into the pan-Canadian dynamics? This is a question that's very similar to the one before, but the way it was explained, what we want to do is make sure that the French continues to go throughout Canada. We think it's very benefit for Quebec, but it's also a very good thing for all Canadians. But yes, we do include Quebec in all this. And I'm done. Yes, I'm done. Thank you. So in the name of our committee and of our colleagues, I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Thank you for your work. And dear colleague, unless there's something else, we adjourn. Okay, adjourned.